Got to come together.
Nimrod kicks it off. Dylan Riley. And Riley can scoop nothing but blue in front of him. Look at Riley go.
Welcome, Bronco Nation, to another exciting video. This is part 2 of the Boise State Football 2025 preview series. Had the awesome honor to have Alexander Tubner on a few weeks back now, to talk about the Boise State defense. We talked about his career, and we talked about what fans could expect for the 2025 season defensively. Well, now we get the awesome opportunity to talk about the Boise State special teams. And again, from that same team, from that same class, Jonah Dalmas. He was a kicker for Boise State until this last season, 2020 to 2024, 5 years there. He made 93 field goals, 86% field goal percentage, and he had a long of 56, 508 points, and then he also handled kickoff duties for a large part as well. And a lot of those numbers I just threw out at you, you might think that's impressive. Well, they're actually even more than that, because the number of kicks made is number 1, just beating out Kyle Brotzman. 86% is number 1, just beating out, actually significantly beating out Nick Calicay, who's the next closest, 80%. And then the longest at 56 is tied for the longest in Boise State history and the longest in their FBS history. So we don't just have a player from this last season when Boise State had a historic year, and we don't just have a great special teamer on like we've been able to have always in the past, but we have a historic, the greatest kicker in Boise State history on today. Jonah Dalmas, it's awesome to have you on. Thanks for coming on, Jonah.
Thank you for having me, man. I'm excited.
I love mentioning that Kyle Brotzman connection there, because Kyle was actually the special teams preview guest last year. And he mentioned, he was like, yeah, Jonah's going to beat my records. He was right there on the edge. But I know he's been a big supporter of you. Actually, he told a great story. He said that he ran into you and Tyler, who's also been on this channel, Rousa. He ran into both of you guys at, I think it was In-N-Out or something like that. And and you mentioned that you were, or Tyler mentioned, like, hey, Jonah's thinking about coming back, and what do you think? And like he said, like, oh man, he's going to beat my records. But he told you, yeah, definitely do it. So
100%. Yeah. Kyle Brotzman, he's one of those, super humble guys that, is just, even though he had a very historic, career at Boise State University, he's one of those guys that just is always rooting for you, which is awesome to see, a legend at Boise State, rooting for you and encouraging you to do your best in everything, in every aspect. So it's nice having a guy like Kyle, who's a, longtime Bronco legend by my side.
Yeah, I've always been a big fan of Kyle Brotzman, also been a big fan of you. So it's awesome to be able to have you guys on. And we're going to be talking about today, we're going to be talking about your incredible career at Boise State. And then we're going to be talking about this 2025 season. So we'll be looking ahead into some of the things that happened last year, some of the questions fans might have, just kind of the biggest good things that happens, and some of the issues, and we'll talk about that. So fans, stick around all the way to the end. Let us know your thoughts in the comments. It's not live, but I go through and I respond to all the comments that come out afterwards. So let you know your thoughts on it, what you thought about Boise State special teams last year and kind of expectations coming to this season, and want to have that conversation with each and every one of you. So let's get started right off the bat here. Career interview section. Just your decision to come to Boise State. Obviously, you came as a walk-on. Your class had a ton of walk-ons that ended up being big leaders on the team. Tyler Crow, yourself, Alexander Tubner, name a couple other guys. So what was that decision like to come and walk on at Boise State?
Yeah, initially I wanted to play soccer in college. That was kind of a big thing after I got back from my mission. And, I was, looking at some D2 schools. I was looking at Utah Valley University. That was kind of just like the number one on my list for soccer at the point. And then the decision honestly came from both of my brothers chatting it up with me, Josh and Jacob. And they said, man, like you have connections into the facility, because my high school football coach, Scott Kreiner, his daughter was dating Joel Schneider in the Boise State facility. So the connection was there, and Scott reached out to Joel and said, hey man, I got some steak dinners that this guy, could be your guy for the upcoming seasons. And so that was kind of my end for the walk-on. And obviously my family all lives in Boise. It was convenient. And so from that point on, I just enrolled at Boise State, got accepted, started my communications major, and then obviously did the walk-on process. They gave me a 14-day tryout, and they had a plaque on my locker like the third or fourth day into that 13-day tryout. So It was kind of funny because no one told me like you're on the team. I just saw the plaque on the locker and I just assumed. So, yeah, no, it was an awesome process, and obviously it was my family kind of pushing me to kind of head that route, and it was obviously me being receptive to obviously that option, and beautiful things happen from there.
Wow. So when you finally received that scholarship, was that a surprise at all when that kind of happened? What did that feel like when you finally got that?
Total surprise. Yeah, it was in one of our team meetings with Brian Harson. He was just talking about, that, hard work doesn't go unnoticed. And obviously when you put your head down and you work hard, then good things are going to happen. And then that's when he put up on the screen, like Jonah Dalmas, like you are on a full like football scholarship. And that was an awesome moment because it was completely unexpected. I wasn't, I wanted to obviously work for a full scholarship. I didn't know it was going to come that fast. But the full scholarship came after um, one of my games my freshman year. I think it was Colorado State on the blue. And I did kickoffs, punting, and field goals and PATs that game. And I did a pretty good job, executing all of those roles. And so that full scholarship came after that game, which was pretty exciting.
What did you learn about yourself throughout the walk-on process? And can you talk a little bit about what it's like being a walk-on at Boise State? Obviously, a school with a very strong, proud walk-on heritage. What did you learn about yourself, and what was that walk-on program like at Boise State?
Yeah, it's very evident as soon as you get to Boise State that it's like it's a program where you have to really put your head down and work, right? That's something that I wanted to do. I was already been training for soccer, so I was getting into pretty good shape. So when in the conditioning stuff, I was going all out, and I had some guys, looking at me like, "Dang, this kid's like trying really hard," or I was looked at as the try hard type of person, but really, like, I knew the standard coming in. The coaches told me the standard coming in. Like, you have to put your head down and work, and you have to earn for the things that you want. Nothing's going to be given, everything's going to be earned, and that's a big, saying that we have at Boise State. And so I knew right from the get go that the standards were really high, and that's what I wanted to do. And so I remember my first meeting, with the special teams coordinator at the time and a couple of the specialist coaches that were helping out. And I sat down in the room and I told him, I said, I want to be the best kicker in Boise State history, and I want to be the best kicker in the country. And obviously they looked at me and they're like, okay, yeah, that's a, good and lofty goal to have. But that was just kind of like, I've always been a competitor my whole life. I've always wanted to be the best at what I was doing. And so that was my mentality coming in. And I was straightforward with it. And I said, yeah, I'll put in the work to make sure that it happens. But as a competitor and playing soccer my whole life, I just knew that when I needed to go after something I wanted, like I was going to do everything I could to make sure it happened. And then obviously I got to work. So the walk on process was pretty cool. And like I said, being a walk on at Boise State, everything is earned and never given. So that's what I wanted to do.
And you got to experience three different head coaches during your time, which is
Right.
not necessarily the norm in college football. Maybe if you're in the NIL market and you're going to a bunch of different schools, but staying at one school and experiencing three different coaches is not the norm, especially at a place like Boise State. And so, obviously Harsin Avalos and then ending up with Spencer Danielson. Boise State doesn't seem to matter who the coach is there. They still have that identity that makes them who they are. The play scheme may be different. You may see, Dirk Cutter run out an offense that we've never really seen before, with this very
Oh
much
yeah.
like running back focus versus quarterback focus offense, or you may see, different cultural elements but overall Boise State maintains that they have blue collar work ethic, that hard nosed type of everyone, the SWAT stuff that Stacey Collins is doing. They
Yeah.
maintain that overall arching culture. Can you talk a little bit about how each coach worked to preserve that unique Boise State identity while also adding their own culture to the mix?
Yeah, each coach definitely had a different mindset, different mentality, different structure for how they did things. But at the end of the day, like, the biggest thing is that Boise State University has a winning culture, and that is what it was all about. We're gonna have a blue collar mentality. We're never gonna lose on the blue, and sometimes we did lose on the blue, but that was a big deal to us. That was the main topic, is that, like, how can we make sure that this never happens again? Because that's the winning, culture tradition that we have at Boise State. Um, so like I said, each coach has a different structure with what they do, But the one thing that will never change within those head coaches that continue to come in, or if we get a new one, the one thing that will never change is that we're going to have a blue collar mentality. We're going to do things that nobody else does, and that we're going to have a winning tradition, and we're going to continue to have a winning tradition. So I think that's the beautiful thing that you see from different coaches that come in. Although things may be different, the schedule might be different, the structure, but that's, three things that, I continue to notice, throughout my years at Boise State, going through three different head coaches, is that, blue collar work ethic, winning tradition, like that was always a huge part of it.
And you talk about each coach bringing their own unique style, identity, a little bit of their own culture, and mixing it into that melting pot of Boise State culture as a whole.
Yeah.
And obviously, Spencer Danielson and his impact this season has been so incredibly huge, and fans are very excited for the future. You got to see Spencer Danielson in his entire career trajectory. I mean, from
Yeah.
assistant defensive coordinator, then all the way up into being the head coach. What was his, or what is his unique aspect that he brings to the table, his own culture and identity that he mixes into that Boise State system?
Yeah. I mean, it's it's a little bit of, the three things that he always talks about. I can't remember off the top of my head, but he, obviously he's love Jesus, work hard. I can't remember the third one off the top of my head right now, but that's been Spencer Danielson the whole entire time that I've been, at Boise State, right? So he never changed. Like, he had a mindset of what helped him to be the best coach, what helped him to be the best husband, what helped him to be the best father for his children. And it's always been that mindset that he's had as a defensive coordinator moving up to head the head coach position. And I think that's truly what makes Spencer special, is he's the same dude every single day. He's the same coach every single day. And I think that's why so many guys get behind. We would run through a wall for Spencer Danielson, just because, he brings us that same attitude and that same mentality each and every single day. Even if we don't have the greatest practice, he's still going to continue to love. He will be hard on you. Coach D will be hard on you, but he's still, number one thing is he's going to continue to love. And I think that speaks a lot about his faith, in which he, talks about a lot in the media, is that he's always going to love because, Jesus loves, so I think that's the beautiful thing about his structure, is that he stays super true to the things that he believes deep down inside. And I think that helps him to, be a great coach that he is, and it's only going to continue to elevate him.
I love that phrase, run through a wall. You hear it so much in relation to Spencer
Yeah,
Johnson. And I think part of that is because the team, they did have to run through a wall for
100%.
Spencer Johnson and for each other. And that wall for Boise State in 2023 was an end to the season, not in the Boise State fashion, right? I mean,
Right.
they were
Yeah. I mean,
they,
we were so excited that Coach D got the head coach job after Avalos being fired, that we started playing the football games for Coach D. Like, we wanted to win just because we wanted Coach D to, like, because obviously it was going to be up in the air at the end of the season, right? Of who's the next coach, who's it going to be, and we all wanted it to be, Coach Danielson. Like, we knew that from the very jump, just because of the human being that he is, the coach that he is. And so we started winning football games for Coach G, just so that he would have the job next year. And I think that's why we, had that comeback season where we won the Mountain West Championship. And I think that's what made it, extra more special, is because he gave us 2 weeks. He's like, 2 weeks of everything that we got, and we put in the work. And I think we did a lot of the stuff that we did it for him, just so that he can have that great opportunity to coach us that next year.
And I know that the 2024 season, how incredible and historic it was, is going to overshadow that 2023 season. Always happens when you have an incredible year like that the next season.
Yeah.
People forget about the 2007 year because 2008 was so great with Kellen Moore coming in. But I think that 2023 season was really one of the most, uniquely Boise State magical seasons. A team that
Yeah.
everyone had counted out, but to be able to come back in the way they did, and everything just works. Everything works out. The teams that need to lose. Boise State wins the games that they need to win. And to go from where they were headed for a trajectory of the worst season since 1997 to a first Mountain West Championship game win since 2019 is an incredible turnaround. You talk about wanting to win those games for Spencer Danielson. And a huge part was that leadership, that senior, junior level leadership stepping up in the locker room. Can you talk a little bit about that was like, what the players did to rally that season, and what the role of leadership became in the locker room, with all these players stepping up saying, we're going to rally together for coach?
That was such a unique part of the journey, is seeing, everybody on the team just fully be all in, all at once, because we knew what the end goal was still, like winning a Mountain West championship. We knew that it wasn't, completely out of the picture, in that moment. And it became like, the whole team, being leaders, which was super cool to see, because, we all loved Coach G so much that like we, all just came together. We were all bought into what Coach D was, telling us that we needed to do these next 2 weeks to even have a shot. And I think that was such a unique part of my career that I was able to witness, is because everybody was just so bought in, so focused, had just the ultimate attention to detail to every little thing, just because we knew that that's what we needed to do to make it to the Mountain West Championship. But also like that, we knew that's what we needed to do in order for Coach D to have a good shot at being our guy for next year as well. And it was so beautiful to see, because a lot of times you'll hear in college football, like, yeah, these bigger SEC programs, it's just like an individual, get paid, ball out. I mean, these are talented guys, but really at Boise State, you experience a football program, you experience a brotherhood. And ultimately, like, when that happened, it was, this brotherhood just became just a whole. You could just feel like the energy in the locker room was different. The whole purpose was different. And it's something hard to explain, just because it was so beautiful to see in the moment. So it's kind of hard to put it in words. But yeah, it was so fulfilling to watch, and just to see everybody, come together and knew what the goal was, and we all just, we all went head first, and it was sweet.
And head first into the 2024 season, which ended up being this incredible historic year for Boise State. Can you
Right.
talk about what the driving factor was? You talked about 2023 being like, all right, we're going to win for coach. We're going to get Spencer Danielson this job. What was the driving force in 2024? What was different that season? Because obviously it was a different season. What was different that season than, the 4-5 that had come before it?
It was strictly just, what we were able to see from that 2023 season. The potential that the team had, coming back and being able to pull off a Mountain West championship win, even though the season was a little rusty for us, towards the middle of it. And I think that's what motivated us the most, is we were like, okay, yeah, we saw our potential, and we knew that we could hang with realistically any single team in the country. And we all believed that. You know what I mean? Not saying that at the beginning we didn't believe that, or, in 2023 we didn't believe that. But that just kind of got us over a little hump of like, we can compete with anyone, as long as we are all bought in, as long as we are doing everything that we need to do, we can compete with anyone. And I think that was the driving force for 2024, is that, no matter who's on that field, as long as we're playing as a team, we're playing hard and we're playing together, with like, good things were going to happen. And I think, a great example of that was the Oregon game, of like, we didn't care that we were in Oregon playing on their field. All we knew is that there was an opponent standing in front of us, and we had to run through them, and that was the driving force for us in the 2024 season. Is, didn't matter who you are, we're going to essentially break you. We're gonna get you out of the way. And that's, what helped us to go into Oregon and almost pull off that game, because, at that point in time, we were just like, we're the Boise State Broncos, and we're going to come, to kick you down. And it was so cool to see. It was awesome.
Sounds like the Boise State spirit of old, and it's great to see that returning the program.
100%.
What besides that Oregon game, was there any other games? Obviously, Fiesta Bowl, which we'll talk about in a moment, but any other games that stood out to you, either from a personal level, where it was just you felt the pressure and you were out there, kick after kick trying to keep Boise State in the game, or from like a team level where you guys had to battle through? Is there any other games that really stood out to you from that 2024 season?
Yeah, I mean, obviously every single game was a battle. I think a big anticipated game was also Washington State on the blue. I didn't really think that anyone expected us to completely blow them out. You know, like, I think people were expecting, game on the blue. It's a night game. This game's gonna come down to the wire, and it did not happen that way. Like, yes, it was kind of back and forth at the beginning of the game, but when we caught our fire, when we caught our rhythm, like, that's what made us dangerous. Is if you get us in rhythm, if you get our offense in rhythm, we're unstoppable. Like, we were just unstoppable. And I think that was a big game, like, kind of like, the Oregon game in a way too, where it was just like, okay, like this is another, big time new school that usually has a really good squad, and people kind of underestimate or kind of saying like, oh, this is going to be a close one. We'll see if we can pull this one off the blue, and then we come out and destroy them. That's that, that driving force that we had where we were just like, no, it doesn't matter who's on that field. We're going to run through them. Right. I think another great example of that game too was San Jose. We were down at San Jose, and all we needed to know is that we just need to, catch that flame, catch that rhythm with the offense, and then we were rolling. And that's exactly what happened. And we ended up coming back and winning that game. The UNLV games, we always knew it was going to be a battle, but, we beat them on the road again at their own stadium, that was the most highly anticipated game of the season, was going back there. And then same thing, offense caught a flame, boom, Mount West championship game. We knew that there was some talk, and that one felt a little different, from all the media stuff. So, I think there was plenty of games that, showcased, the mentality of what we had in that 2024 season. And even though there was some ups and downs in it, and some ups and downs for myself as well, I still understood the mentality. I still understood like the driving force of where we wanted to go. So it was a pretty spectacular season to be a part of.
I love that you mentioned that as UNLV games, because you've kind of got to be part of those UNLV matchups at a unique point. Because
Yeah.
Boise State UNLV games didn't used to be interesting. It was like watching Boise State versus New Mexico. And the three times that you have played UNLV, they have all been interesting because they've either been in Mountain West Championship games or they've been at home. And that UNLV game, when you look back at your careers, at least when I look back at your career specifically, there's a few games that stand out where special teams, specifically kicking game, was such a huge role in winning that game. The 2022 Air Force game on that's a big one, stands out. You 12 points out of the 19. That's a big field goal winning game. But then UNLV, I mean, I believe you made 4 out of 4 in that game, and Boise State wins 29-24. And there wasn't like a moment where it was like a walk off, got to kick it in overtime kind of feeling. But the field goal game was such a huge part of that, and it was a struggle. I mean, that was a game where UNLV dialed in. Ashley Jeti got hurt part through that game and had to keep playing. So that was a real struggle for a team. And there was a lot of pressure on you, a lot of pressure on the team as a whole. How in those moments do you stay focused? What's your technique for not letting the pressure, the moment get to you, and just staying focused on, all right, go out, do the job, back to the sidelines?
I think it was just, the preparation that we have, obviously working with Mason and James, two completely, unreal talent to work with. I think it was just the confidence that we had in our operation. We had practiced our operation every single day. We became really close friends, really comfortable with each other. And we all knew that we would run through a wall for each other. So we aligned, in one purpose to understand that, like, yeah, we're going to have a huge impact to some of these games, and we need to make sure that we're prepared for it. And so it all came down to preparation throughout the week, making sure that we're doing everything that's going to be game realistic, so that when that time comes, none of us are, feeling any sort of pressure. And I think UNLV games are a perfect example of that, because we knew it was going to be a dogfight every time that we play them, because they're a really talented team. That was the mentality throughout the process, is that, we're going to, prepare like it's a game throughout the week for these games. And then obviously when we go in, we know that, our operation's pretty unstoppable. So when we would go in, we would, play our part, do our thing, and then we would celebrate at the end of it. You know what I mean? So it was pretty awesome to work with Mason and James, and to be able to do it with those guys, because that was a pretty special group of guys to work with. But at the same time, like we mentioned, I was usually 3 for 3 or 4 for 4 when playing UNLV, and then we come to the championship game and I don't have any field goals at all.
Right.
So it's like, that's the weird part about it all, is I'm usually with those, better teams that we play, going 3 for 3, 4 for 4, and hitting a lot of field goals to go into no kicks at all in that game, just because we were able to, prepare our best for that championship game, and then just absolutely go out and dominate that team. But like you said, like it's all in the preparation for when we go on the field. We know that, our operation's precise. We're right where we need to be, and we just go out and execute and put points on the board for the team.
Well, and you bring up a good point there because between 2021 and 2023, so after the COVID season, you had 20 plus field goals every
Yeah,
single year. And then
right.
last season, that was only 18 attempts on the entire
I know.
season. I mean,
Yeah,
so, and that was a big part of Boise State's offense. Like, it's great to be part of a team that is just so, Boise State went for so many fourth downs. So to have a
yeah.
coach with so much trust in the offense and then also have an offense that is so productive, so you're not kicking as much. But did Boise State's style this season add a little bit more pressure? Because a lot of times when you were running out there, you hadn't kicked maybe in a few games, or it had been like you hadn't kicked at all in the game, and now it's like halfway through, and a lot of times it was from further distance, or the moment mattered more. Did that add any additional pressure? Did rust set in a little bit? Did that have any kind of impact on your game at a personal level?
I would say, in a way, right? Because I'm going to, throughout my whole entire career, it's rare for me not to have a field goal in one game. Like, so we're going to a point where it's like, it's rare for me not to be on the field getting 3 points on the board to a season where it's like I'm going 2 or 3 games without even having a field goal.
Yeah.
And then I'm still having to continue my process of preparation and, making sure that I'm, in the spot where I need to be. So I would say, yeah, there was, some added pressure to that just because our offense is rolling. Um, but that was also cool to see our offense rolling. It's good to see our offense in rhythm, clicking, catching fire. And that was a beautiful thing to see. It made my job a lot easier because I had to just go in and hit PATs. And obviously, like that was still fun for me because we're, obviously celebrating a touchdown but yeah, I would say it was definitely a different process and definitely adjusted some preparation just because obviously I'm used to it being rare for me not to hit field goals in games.
Yeah, it's definitely been different the last few years with you and James out there punting and kicking. Because usually when the offense stalls out, you go, man, and maybe there's still that feeling like, I mean, it'd be great to keep the touch
Yeah,
but now we get to see, you and James go out there and perform, and that's been awesome the last couple of years. But
100%. Yeah.
so and then obviously what you all did, the special teams unit, defense, offense working together, it came out and ended up with Boise State ending up in the playoffs, which was just such an incredible moment. You've been in college football for a few years now. And you were there when the playoffs was not
Yeah.
a possibility, and even when it wasn't even starting to be talked about as something they were going to go to. It's only been the last few years that that's really gotten picked up steam and ended in this season. That I always say actually having a chance. So what did it mean, before we talk about getting to the Fiesta Bowl, what did it mean for you this season and as a team to know that it wasn't just, hey, we're going to go make a bowl game and see what happens? Like, no, we are going to go to the playoffs. That is a stated goal, to go to the
Yeah.
Fiesta Bowl. I mean, that is a
Yeah.
change because, I mean, talking to Boise State players and head coaches before, it's not, we're going to go to the Fiesta Bowl, the New Year's Six, because that's all out of their hands. It's like, we're going to go to a bowl game. This year, we're
Yeah.
going to go to the playoffs. How did that change the approach of the team? What was that like for you?
It was good because, in the preparation, we knew that we needed to be to a point come to that Mountain West championship game against UNLV. We had the home field advantage, and we knew that we had to be at a point where it was absolute domination when it came to that game. We knew that we needed to be playing our most precise football, when we got to that point, because we knew that there was going to be playoff time afterwards. So we knew that we needed to be playing our best football up to that point. We knew we needed to dominate and leave no doubt on that field so that we could have the opportunity to go and compete with the best of the best. So I think that, that process was something that was really special because we understood like that's just another moment that brings the whole team together and gets us all on the same page and just lights that fire for us knowing that, okay, this is the mission and we're going to do everything that we can to get to that point, right? And that's what it was. We won games. We got to the Mountain West championship game. In order for us to go to the Fiesta Bowl, we knew we had to play our best football and absolutely dominate, and that's what we did. And so it was special to see all the guys, be on the same page with that, and then obviously doing everything that we needed to do to get to that point.
Now, did you grow up a fan of Boise State? Were you watching those earlier Fiesta Bowl games? Was that part of your childhood at all?
No, I didn't watch any of those games. I didn't know, any of the history of those games until I got to Boise State because I was born in Colorado, lived there for 8 years. So I moved to Boise in 2008. And so I didn't hear much or watch much of Boise State football. And at that time, I was kind of, soccer is my life type of deal. So I was watching more soccer. I was watching, college football. I was watching NFL football. And it was actually funny too, because my dad's from Pittsburgh. So I actually grew up watching Penn State football. Like I grew up a Penn
Wow.
State fan. So obviously being able to play against Penn State in the Fiesta Bowl was like a dream come true. It was the most, just adrenaline rush game that I've ever felt in my career. And so that was awesome to be able to experience.
Can you talk a little bit about that feeling of walking out, going through the first time the team shows up at the stadium, is going through
Yeah.
warm-ups, at the Cardinal Stadium, you're there at the Fiesta Bowl, and you're there. You've made it. That goal that
Yeah.
you started, that transition that started, like whether or not you grew up being a fan of Boise State watching Fiesta Bowls, this team that was special. All right, it's special to be a Boise State player and go to Fiesta Bowls where Boise State's made its name. But this team, compared to what happened in 2023 and the journey, the transition to, I mean, it's storybook, obviously winning would have been the storybook ending, but it's storybook to end up there at the Fiesta Bowl. Well, what was that like, getting out there, walking? What kind of emotions were running through as you've made it to that objective that started all the way back at the end of 2023?
Yeah, obviously, the mentality was we're on a mission, right? This is a business trip, like there's going to be a lot of fun stuff there for us to do at the Fiesta Bowl, but the mentality of everything that we did was like we're here for one purpose and we're here to win this football game. Um, so it's hard going to a big stage like that in the Fiesta Bowl and then having all the hotel stuff that they have for us. We're staying at a resort, like all that kind of thing, and then going to the stadium and seeing the whole setup. It's a lot more, it's bigger, it's more fancier, like more fancy than the Mount West Championship games, So it's really hard not to become distracted, from all of those things that you're witnessing when you get there, showing up to seeing the field for the first time with the team, being in the resort and having access to all this VIP stuff there, So it's really hard to have that mentality of this is a business trip, and then obviously having how the Fiesta Bowl wants to make it a fun and exciting experience for us. So, but it was cool. All of it was so cool, so fun to be able to experience all the stuff that they had for us at the resort. The resort treated us, like the best, than you can ever imagine. Obviously going to the field and seeing that for the first time and just taking it and soaking it all in was something special. So yeah, when you have all those things, it's hard to keep it the main thing. Um, but I think we did a pretty good job leading up to that moment of keeping it the main thing. It's just we weren't able to execute in the game, unfortunately. But yeah, I mean that's the battle that you have when you get there. But it was so fun to take it all in and just be like, man, all of our hard work, is paying off because it got us to this moment, which was pretty special.
Well, we'll talk a little bit more about the season, different pieces as we get into the 2025 special teams preview. Before we move on to that, last question for you, talking about your career. What's the biggest takeaway from your time at Boise State? What's going to stick with you as you go through into your professional career, either athletically or in the business world, whatever that ends up being? What's that biggest takeaway or memory or whatever it is that's going to stick with you going forward?
Yeah, I mean, I took a lot of really great things from, mentors and, the culture of the program. Everything's going to be earned and never given to you. That's a big thing that I've always, held true to, is that I got to work for everything. I got to work, to achieve my goals. Like we got to work super hard to be able to win those games and have our preparation be like, game day reality. Avery Williams, a guy that I had, a great opportunity to play with when I first got to Boise State. He, was able to see my potential, and he came up and talked to me, and he said, every year, make sure that you have that same walk on mentality as how you came in here. Kekala Kaniho, a thing that he's always said that has always stuck with me is no fear and no hesitation. You got a guy that's, one of the smaller guys on the football field, but he would get messy. He would get right into those in the pile. He would, make hard hits and he would just go for it. You know what I mean? Like talk about a guy who was not the biggest guy on the field, but he proved with his actions that he had no fear and no hesitation when he was playing the game of football. So yeah, those were, three things that I, work hard for the things. It's not going to be given to you. Always have a walk-on mentality so that you have that chip on your shoulder and that fire to continue to get better and elevate your game in any way that you need to. And then obviously when you're in those situations, have no fear and have no hesitation and just keep getting after it. And I think those are like the three things that have always, stayed really true to me and that I've always, remembered in the back of my head that's helped me to, get to the point where I'm at today.
Well, thanks so much for that. And talking about your career, there'll be more moments to talk about it as we move throughout the 2025 preview. But let's pivot now in the video. This is the part I know a lot of people probably come on to watch, talking about the 2025 season and a little bit of a look ahead here. So, starting off with the 2025 special teams preview, I want to look at the coaching staff a little bit because you return of a familiar face. Stacy Collins comes back. Talk about another Penn State connection coming from Penn
Yeah.
State.
Yeah.
He came back to Boise State as the coordinator, special teams coordinator in 2021, and then he returned in 2024. Can you talk a little bit about what his coaching style and his vision, what he brings to the team that's a little bit different than other guys? Well, can you talk a little bit about what he's like as a coach?
Yeah, obviously he brings in that SWAT culture, everything that he does as a special teams coordinator is always high intensity, you know, attention to detail, doing everything full speed, and then obviously when he's coaching all of that stuff, he has the most energy in the room doing it. Like he will yell at the top of his lungs the whole time he's giving a presentation just to make sure that one, it's waking us up and rejuvenating us in the morning, but two, he's really serious and passionate about the things that he coaches. And I think that's super special to see is that somebody who is so passionate, about his scheme and about his culture of special teams, that he, is willing to come every single day with that same energy, the same mindset to get us to be something special during the special, like every time we get on the field to do special teams operational stuff. And I think that's really awesome to see. He was the same, was there 2021. And as soon as he came back, nothing was different. He was the same guy, always the guy that had the high energy, always the guy that was super passionate about his scheme, about the game of football in general. And I think that's, what makes Stacy Collins a great coach.
Well, one of the great things about Boise State in general is they've always had that focus on special teams. I mean, back in
Yeah.
the day, it wasn't, a lot of teams will kind of use special teams as like their backup guys or their camp guys. The guys that aren't going to be seeing the field, aren't important as much, are going to be kind of your special teams. But that hasn't been Boise State's culture. You had back in the day, you had Ian Johnson and Austin Pettis, blocking kicks. So
Yeah.
Boise State's always had that special teams focused culture. Would you say that Stacey Collins still brings that same? Is that still part of Boise State? Is that it's not just you got to earn a right onto special teams. It's not just a backup kind of position. Would you say that focus is still a part of Boise State's culture?
100%. Yeah. Cause I mean, you win or lose games with special teams, so I think that's always been the culture of Boise State is special teams. It was always a huge thing with Brian Harsin, Avalos, Coach D loves special teams. And so, Coach Collins, obviously, when he was here in 2021, we had Kekala Kaniho blocking punts for us and taking it back to the house. You know what I mean? So, like, we had that emphasis, and obviously, we were excited for Stacy Collins to come back to return to Boise State from Penn State, too, because of that season that we had where we blocked 3 punts and took them to the house, or we were, blocking field goals. So we already knew the expectation and we already knew the standard that was, it was going to be really high due to the fact that he's already had previous history with us. But yeah, I mean, special teams is always, a pivotal part of, what we do at Boise State and a pivotal part of the culture. And I think Stacy Collins does a really good job of making sure that people understand, the level of importance that, it has for winning football games.
Well, another coach that joined the roster and former guest on the channel, Tyler Rausa. Can you
Yeah.
talk about his addition? Obviously, a great kicker for Boise State. Talked about he's been on the channel, done these previews with me before. And actually, the year that he joined as a coach, he was supposed to come on and do the preview. And then, like a week, or maybe a month before, I'm like, all right, hey, man, when's the best date for you to do it? And he's like, hey,
Yeah.
Jacob, I can't do it anymore. And so I had to find someone else. Again, Joel Velasquez ended up coming on. It was awesome. But can you talk a little bit about what he's brought to the Boise State special teams as a coach for coming back as a player, obviously, and then now coming back as a coach? Can you talk a little bit about what he brought and how he kind of made the unit better?
Yeah. So, I mean, we're talking about a guy who's played a lot of football in his life. You know what I mean? Like he's been, playing football for, I think, close to a decade, if not a decade. Right. So he's played in all these different leagues. He's seen the ins and outs of everything. He's worked with a ton of long snappers, punters, a lot of special teams coaches that have a lot of great influence to the game of football, a lot of head coaches that have a great influence. So we're talking about a guy that knows a lot about the kicking world, the long snapping world, the punting world. And so he was able to bring all of those things to the table when he came in as a coach, like a specialist coach to Boise State. And I think, his influence was also really cool because not a lot of special teams coaches know, the technique or the mechanics that go into kicking or long snapping or punting, but he knows that. Like, he's seen it, he feels it, he knows the swing feels, he knows the swing thoughts. And so it was really nice to have a guy like that who was kind of like another set of eyeballs for us, that if we didn't catch anything, if we didn't feel something that felt off, he was able, with his knowledge and his experience, to be able to see that. And so I think that was the best part about, him, is being able to do film study with him and being able to catch things that we never really, thought about or seen us do before. And he was able to say, like, yo, this is what happened here. This is why you didn't make the best contact. And we're seeing it. This is why, So we're talking about a guy that knows the kicking world, the long snapping world, punting world so well. And I think that had a huge influence on us because there was always something we were working on day to day, at practice, prepping for games. There was always something that we were trying to do to elevate our game. And then obviously he just brought a lot of football knowledge to us, which was super, super cool and important for us to know as well. But yeah, I mean, he's a kicker at heart, man. So he really just brought the energy, and he always reminded us how important we are and how important our role is on the team. And I think that's something special that, a lot of kickers, punters, long snappers, and, in college are, not as fortunate to have a kicking coach like we did at Boise State.
Yeah, he definitely won't let you forget he's a kicker at heart, and he won't let you forget he can still nail the long ones. He's got his son holding for him now while he goes out in the Boise State practice facility and kicks those long field goals. So
Yeah.
it's awesome to have a great coaching staff like that. And obviously this was a year that brought its challenges. And I think that fans, they tend to focus on some of the downsides and issues. And they don't realize that there was a real trend in the back end of the season where the Boise State special teams really, really improved on some of those issues. So we're going to talk, we're always upfront honest in all these videos. We're going to talk about some of the negatives that were early on in the Boise State kick, especially the coverage, and then we'll talk about how they got better, and just get your thoughts on just, hey, what changed, what happened with that to really improve. And what I want to kind of lay it out for that is Boise State on the season for their kick return coverage. They were 98th overall, so they averaged a 22.22 yard average in kick return allowed. They allowed a touchdown, obviously a big reason they lost in that Oregon game, and then punting as well. Punting was actually worse as far as coverage goes, 23rd overall, 14.36 yard average, and another special teams touchdown versus Oregon. But fans will like to focus on the negatives overall in those numbers. But the truth is, on the back end of the season, Boise State massively improved. In the last 5 games of the season, Boise State averaged only 16.46 yards allowed on kick returns and only 2.67 yards allowed in punt returns. And versus Penn State, no kick returns or punt returns allowed. Versus UNLV, one of the greatest special teams return games. You have DeJesus out there. Boise State basically held him to nothing. He had averaged 7 yards on two punt returns in the championship game. So Boise State did a massive job in the back end of the season, really limiting and correcting and making some massive changes. But obviously early on, there were some issues. And I think one of the things that confused the fans the most was the kickoff scheme, not necessarily the coverage, but just what the goal was with that. I know obviously a lot of people talk about, hey, the goal's always kick it out of the back of the end zone. That can't always happen. And it seemed like a little bit of an interesting focus where it was like trying to angle the kick maybe to one side of the field, and it would go out of bounds sometimes, or would end up in a long return. Can you talk a little bit about what the kickoff scheme was at the beginning of the season, and then how that changed throughout the season, and how Boise State was able to have such a dramatic turnaround, fixing those issues on the back end?
Yeah, I think with the kickoffs, the goal was to put in the end zone every single time. And like you said, that's a big ask. It might be unrealistic, for some guys it might not be, right? So I think, a lot of the times with the teams that we were playing, they always had some talented returner. And I think the focus was just to keep it away from him, right? We wanted to keep it away from the dangerous guy that has a big impact on their special teams and a big impact in the game in general. And so that was the focus, is to keep away from those guys so that, we can hold them from getting in rhythm for their game and being a big part of, the energy shift in the game, right? So we wanted to keep it away from them, prevent any sort of momentum that was going to go against us. And then obviously too, I think, we have veteran guys, on special teams running down for kickoff or punt like Alexander Tubner, but we started implementing, some walk-on guys to fill that role with some veteran guys that were, keeping the standard high, right? We wanted everyone to be able to know the standard of Boise State special teams. And so we started to implement those walk-ons in with those veteran guys just to make sure that we were, hitting it on the nail and making sure that we know that this is a big part of the game and that we have to do everything that we can, right? We experienced some inconsistency at the very at the beginning of the season while doing that. And so it came to a point where we had to put our best guys on the field for special teams. And that's where we saw the shift of, those numbers starting to, flip-flop, and we started to get a lot more positives in there, is because we started putting the best guys on the field to be able to operate in those situations. And I think that was a big part of it.
Well, for Boise State, while the return coverage may have been an issue again at the beginning of the season, massive improvement on the back end. I think you're going to see that trend and continue into this next season. I think that's something to be very excited for. While the return coverage may have been an issue that had to be fixed, Boise State actually did really, really well in their kickoff and punt return. It's been an issue the last couple of years that they've struggled really after losing great returners like Avery Williams and Khalil Shakir. Boise State kind of struggled to kind of find itself a little bit in that punt return, kick return game. But last year, specifically in kick return, Boise State just really exploded back onto the scene. They were in the bottom end of college football coming into this year, and then this last season, they were actually in the top 50 in kick return, 33rd overall, 22.3-yard average and a touchdown. And Cameron Bates was a huge part of that, but the biggest influencer in that was Dylan Riley, whose hat I'm wearing right now. Definitely, I'll check it. I'll put a link in the description. Non-sponsored, just love to support Boise State athletes. But Dylan Riley, 8 returns for a 29.3-yard average, long 96, and a touchdown. He just exploded onto the scene.
Last season, I think it was just one of those things where it's just like, we're putting our best guy out there. Obviously Ashton was doing a lot for us. We would put Ashton in for kickoff sometimes just to kind of help distract, just to give us more lanes to run, because obviously when Ashton was on the field, everyone goes to him because he was proven last year to be very unstoppable. But at the same time too, Dylan Riley, he really stepped up for us too, and I think that was a big part of being in the running back room. And the standard that we have, obviously, with Ashton Genty doing some pretty remarkable things in that running back room, and the standard that he set for those younger guys in that room to be great. And I think Dylan Riley really, put his best foot forward. He stepped up to that role, and then he was able to get obviously that 100-yard, touchdown kickoff return, which was awesome. Being a freshman and being able to do that in a football game at a Division I level is pretty spectacular. But like I said, we want our best guys in the field. And I think, Dylan Riley, he did a good job just because he had that standard so high being in a running back room with Ashton. And obviously T Crow and the mentality that they, brought for that position. And so I think there's a lot of, different factors that come in. But if you already have kickoff return experience, you're going to be, taking reps at practice and giving it your best go.
Well, I'm sure what he did wasn't a surprise because you see what he's doing in practice, and then he goes out and puts it on the field. And I would expect him to probably reprise that role again next season. But is there anybody else that you've seen in practice in the kick return game, and really especially the punt return game? Because while we've got a stalwart coming back in Dylan Cooper, who did such a great job this last year, he's moving on. At Gilligan's nephew for any of the older Boise State fans. But he's Tim Gilligan. He's moving on, so Boise State's got to make some replacements in the punt return. You're not going to have Ashton to distract. I think Tyler Crow also lined up sometimes in kick return. He's gone as well. So are there any other new guys either in kick return or punt return that Boise State fans should keep an eye on? Or I mean, Latrell Caples, I know he's done some roles in that as well. Anybody that might you think fill that role or surprise at all this coming season?
Yeah, no, I think Latrell is a reliable one too. Dylan Riley will also, get some reps in there too. I think a big guy that we picked up for special teams, is Malik Sherrod, the Fresno State running back. He, did a lot of special teams at Fresno and did a lot of really, really great things on kickoff and punt return, whatever it was that he was playing over there at Fresno. Malik was, the one that had my only kickoff return on me in my career when we played Fresno at Fresno in 2023 or something like that. So I think Malik definitely is from my opinion, and obviously the things that he's done at Fresno State, I think he'll probably be, top of that list with Latrell and Dylan. I very well think that he could win that job as well, just because of the successes that he has had with the return game over at Fresno. And so, my best bet is that it's going to be, one of those three guys, Dylan, Latrell or Malik. And I think maybe Malik will probably be taking the majority of that role.
Well, let's talk a bit about the kicking and punting game specifically here to kind of end the video. And while I think that the return coverage overall was on the end of last season on an upward trajectory, and a coach of Stacy Collins' caliber, he's going to definitely be all over that offseason, make sure it maintains that trajectory. And then,
Right.
there was a lot of great excitement in the return game as well, so a lot to be excited about. Still got Malik Stroud coming in and everything he did at Fresno. A lot to be excited about there. Two of those areas where it's unknown is because we're losing two of the greatest players, not two of the, but statistically the two greatest players in Boise State history from a special teams perspective. And so this is tough. I mean, usually you may have to lose a great kicker and you may have to lose a great punter, and now we got to lose both of them at the same time.
Yeah.
So talking about kicking, and usually when we have a transfer coming in, we don't have the opportunity to say, like, what have you seen from them, because you haven't seen anything from them in practice.
Yeah.
However, this time, it's not decided who's going to be the starter, but one of the prospective starters there, Colton Boomer, transferring in from UCF, you actually did get to interact with and see because of a game
Yeah.
that I actually was in Boise for, the UCF game on the blue, obviously, where
Yeah.
he just had a stellar game, 2 out of 2 on 50-yard field goals, excluding a 55-yarder to clinch that one. So
Yeah.
he's already won on the blue, but now hopefully he'll be doing it in a Boise State uniform. But he's a great guy. 2023 Big 12 All Honorable Mention. He was 4 out of 4 kicking versus Boise State, including that 55-yarder. 2022 Phil Steele All AAC third team. 14 out of 15 kicks made that year. 2024 injured, so not necessarily numbers to look at from that season, but he'll be coming in, I'm sure, with a lot to prove this year. Can you talk a little bit about your own interactions with Colton, maybe that UCF game, is what you see out of him as one of the potential guys to step up and fill your stead here?
Yeah, no, I've had the opportunity to meet Colton. Obviously, when he came on his visit here, I was able to meet up with him and just kind of, see how he was like in the Boise area, see how he was like in the program, the culture, and everything like that. So all around, just great kid. He has a good head on his shoulders. He wants to compete. Obviously, he wants to be great. He has aspirations of being, one of the greats in college football. So I think he's definitely a good fit. There's going to be some competition with Colton Boomer and Jarrett Reeser in the kicking position. Obviously, Jarrett Reeser's, been behind me all last season, and him and I got to compete all last season, which was awesome. Jarrett did a great job. Had some some kickoff role last season as well. So yeah, I'm excited to see what that competition is going to look like. Obviously, we know Colton Boober, he has a leg on him. He's a good kicker, and Boise State is not an easy stadium to come and play in, and he was able to go 4 for 4 and hit a game-winning field goal in Albertson Stadium. So we know from the previous games that he's played in that he can hang with the pressure and make big kicks when big kicks, we need to make big kicks. So that competition will be interesting. I don't know who's going to come on top of it. I think either kicker who's going to be on the field is going to be, great in that kicking role, whether it's Jarrett Reeser or Colton Boomer. I don't think we can go wrong with any of them. So I'm excited to see how that competition plays out and who's going to have the starting role.
It's great to have that competition to produce the strongest iron at the end of the fire there. You got a
Right.
guy, a Reeser, redshirt junior coming in who's been behind you these years, has learned the scheme, has seen it, been part of all of the practices, learning under the mentorship of a great guy like Tyler Rouse, and of course yourself throughout that time. And then you have a guy like Colton Boomer, and come in with all of his previous experience that he has. And so that'll be a really cool one to keep an eye on coming into fall.
But like I said, like this competition is going to be, something special to watch. You got 2 high caliber kickers in that Boise State specialist room right now. So it's going to be, I'm going to sit back and enjoy watching this competition happen too, because I'm excited to see who takes over the job. And then obviously, like I said before, I don't think you can go wrong with either or, but being able to, be a part of Colton's host over for his visit was something special too. And be able to rekindle all those memories that we have together at that game on the blue was pretty fun as well. So
Well, again, one more element for Boise State this year is obviously that kicking competition, but they got to replace their punter as well because James Ferguson
Right.
Reynolds, after his historic career at Boise State, he's off to do great things at Oregon. And wish him all the best there. But for Boise State, they got to go and find a new guy, and they have. They brought in a really exciting guy in Oscar Doyle, another guy from the same pipeline as James Ferguson Reynolds at Pro Kick
Yep.
Australia, Weber State transfer, and he's done some great stuff at the FCS level. 2024 FCS Punter of the Year semifinalist. So just right there on the edge. 44.4 yards per punt average, fourth in school history. And again, he brings that traditional Aussie style, so he'll fit nicely into the scheme that's been created around James Ferguson. Have you gotten to have any kind of interactions with him at all? I think he was obviously a later ad with James leaving later and unexpectedly. Any kind of interactions with him at all?
I have yet to have any interactions with him. I've seen him in, obviously some of the film because I still keep in contact with Jarrett Reeser pretty often. And he'll send me some videos of practices and stuff. So I've seen him hold. He's a good holder. He's good at operating in the holding position. As far as any punting, I haven't seen any film, haven't had the interaction with him yet. So hopefully I'm able to meet him here soon. I go into the facility pretty often sometimes. So just haven't had the chance to meet him yet. But from what I've heard, he's a great addition, and I think he'll be a good aspect to the special teams unit. And then um, obviously we'll be able to step up and continue to flip the field for us. So everything that I've heard has been, sounding good and good guy I've heard, and a great athlete. So I look forward to the chance I get to meet him. But I think, he's a good role for what this team is looking for.
Last question here on the kind of the special teams and interaction with the punting game. You got to kind of watch the transition of college football from very much more of a traditional style of drop back and boom it up, punting to that Aussie style, roll
Yeah.
out, anything could happen. Then just draw the team up and get your coverage team time to run downfield and then kick it and corner coffin it like James Ferguson did so many times. So you got to see that transition from that very traditional punting style to that Australian style. What do you think some of the reasons that has become such a focus? I mean, it kind of was like just kind of took the college football world by storm, and everyone was like, that is the way it's going to be. Do you think there is still any kind of place for the traditional punter in the college football world?
I really do hope so. I like the traditional punting. I like you got a lot of guys in college football that do traditional pocket punts and they can boom it. You got Australians coming from pro kick who can do the traditional spiral and just boom it. So I think, with a guy like James Ferguson Reynolds, he can do traditional pocket punting, which I'm sure we'll probably see a lot of at Oregon now, is the pocket punting. And he's really good at it. But James is such a unique punter because he can put that ball anywhere. So that's why we did a lot of the rollout, rugby scheme stuff, is because it's like James is throwing a ball out there and he's just putting just throwing dimes, but he's doing it with his foot. So I think that's why, allowed James to be such a big influence to the punting game, is wherever we needed that ball to be, he was able to put it there. And it just depends on which Australian you have that can do that. You know what I mean? So, like I said, I haven't seen any film on the new Aussie that's in here, but being able to do what James was able to do when he was here and put that ball wherever we needed it to be, that's a pretty awesome gift somebody can have. So like, yeah, I think it's, if you have a guy like JFR that has the talent to put it anywhere on the field, I think it can definitely be lethal. But I'm also a huge fan of the traditional pocket punt as well.
Your description of JFR there actually brought up a memory of a debate I was having with Boise State fans after James Ferguson transferred, talking about how big of an impact this was. And I really think and thought that it was a major impact to lose a punter of James Ferguson Reynolds, because I think a lot of fans don't necessarily understand the caliber of player that James is and how unique he is in the college football world. There's a reason he's broken all of Boise State's records, is because not every punter just comes in and does what he does.
Right.
And it's not just like plug and play. And I'm excited for what Oscar's going to do, and I think that Boise State's going to maintain high levels there. But can you talk about the impact of losing a guy like James Ferguson? How unique is he of the guys that you've got to play with in the college football world right now?
This guy is unreal. The things that he was able to do, and just to see him do it every single day, it was a pleasure watching him do what he was able to do. You got a guy who grew up kicking a ball his whole entire life. and you can tell him to do something with the football and he's able to do it. It's pretty spectacular. You know, he had a huge influence to Boise State. I'm not going to speak for him on the reasons, you know, why he made the decision that he made, but it was just, you know, it came down to a business decision for him. And that's where he felt in his heart he needed to do, and he needed to find a different place to go, which I think is okay. You know, I think it's okay to, if you have those desires in your heart to do that, I think it's okay to, you know, follow those desires. And that's what he was able to do. But obviously, to your point, losing a guy like that, he's very unique. He's very special. He was able to do a lot of things as a punter that most people can't do. A lot of American, you know, grew up in America, traditional punters can't do a lot of the things that JFR was able to do on the football field. And maybe they can, maybe I'm wrong, but maybe I'm biased just because me and JFR are like best friends now and we're super close. But I'm talking about a guy that I would run like receiver routes at practice, and he's kicking the ball right into my hands in a perfect pocket. Like there's very little things that this guy can't do. And I think obviously it's going to take a hit losing a guy like that, but we have another Australian that's coming in who's from Pro Kick, the same academy that James came from. So I think, you know, having the scheme that we do have, I think I think this Aussie kid's going to come in and he's going to, you know, be able to, you know, do great things for the program.
Last question on special teams. It's been a great discussion, and so thank you for your time. Letting us run a little bit long
Absolutely.
here. But last question for the special teams. You talk about having so many great players interacted, and this may not be a guy that you interacted with so much, is more on the punting side. But something Boise State has been blessed with, and a position that gets completely overlooked by almost everybody, is long snapper. They have had
Yeah.
two back-to-back incredible long snappers, and Daniel Contrell and then Mason Hutton, who has one more year here for Boise State. Can you talk about the impact that those guys, especially Mason, still be playing in this year, but the impact that both of those guys have had on this unit, and how important it is to have such a key player who knows their role and is going to go out and execute it in that long snapper position?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, working with a guy like Daniel Cantrell, man, he's a freaking beast. Like we're talking about it, and that's like a big reason why our special teams was so good back in the day too, is because Daniel, he would snap that ball and he was a freaking heat-seeking missile going down there, right? He wanted to hit everything that was in his way. And I think that in the long snapper position, I think that's what made him so lethal at his position, is because he was willing to be the freaking hammer running down there and hitting people, whoever was in his way, right? So I think that brought a lot of value to the special teams position as a long snapper, because he had the speed to run down there and make plays. I'm not saying Mason doesn't. There's other things that Mason is good at. He's a big, tall frame. He's able to block really well. So obviously we're able to use his height and his weight to be able to, you know, get in front of the guys and stop the pressure from coming from the punter. But that's such a position that is definitely, you know, overlooked a lot of the times. The things that they have to do, the preparation that they're having to do to prepare for games and prepared for, you know, people running at them full speed is pretty insane. But Mason, he's high caliber long snapper. I did notice that when the first team, second team honorable mention list came out, I saw that Mason was mentioned in there for first team. I don't even think that the time I was at Boise State, they had, you know, first team, second team honorable mention stuff for long snappers. I don't even know if that was a thing. So I think this is a new thing that's been implemented. And I think that's a thing that we pushed for, because obviously we want, you know, Mason, with the talent that he has, we want him to, you know, be able to further his career in the NFL. So, you know, being able to get that recognition, the recognition that he deserves because of the athlete and the long snapper that he is, I think is a big deal, you know. So but yeah, being able to work with those guys, it's been amazing, because you see a lot of the mechanics that we go through as kickers and punters, but then also all the mechanics that they have to go through in the long snapping position to be as consistent as they are when the pressure's on the line. It's truly remarkable to be able to see the talent and consistency those kind of guys have.
Well, it's to me an exciting year for Boise State for a lot of reasons. Obviously, you'll have a little bit of a new look offense with Ashton Genty no longer there. The
Yeah.
defense is going to look pretty same in a lot of areas, but obviously you lose some key guys across the board in some different spots. Obviously, Alexander Tubner being such a huge leader, but then special teams obviously going to look so different. I think you're going to
Yeah.
see very different. Obviously, kicking and punting, which are the main faces of special teams, are going to look completely different. And I think that you're going to see some very positive trends in kick return and punt return. So overall, I'm very excited for this season, Boise State overall, but I'm
Yeah.
also very excited for Boise State special teams. I think you're going to see upward trends in a lot of areas, kicking and punting with new guys coming in, settling in. It's always a developmental period, a little bit of rust, but both, whether it's Boomer, whether it's Reeser, both of those guys I think can carry this at a very high level. And then as far as Oscar coming in, another guy he played, that Aussie rules football, so he's had that same kind of similar experience, JFR. I think he'll continue to maintain a high standard there. Excited to see what he does. But do you have any
Yeah.
kind of final thoughts on Boise State this season? Sometimes people like to throw out a record prediction. If you want to, you can do that.
Yeah.
But just any final thoughts?
I think my final thoughts are just, obviously me and James were able to do some pretty awesome things at Boise State together. We were competitors. We held each other at a very high standard. We held, like me, Mason, and James, we wanted to be the best and the best of college football, right? And I think we got so much love from Bronco Nation for the things that we were doing, so much, appreciation for the kicking, the punting, the long snapping world. I just really hope that because me and him are not there anymore, that the kicking, the punting, and the long snapping position still has so much value at Boise State that I just hope and pray that the Bronco fans will continue just to love and show their utmost support for those guys, because it really is a very taxing position, right? Obviously, you have positions where you're getting playing more in the game, but the position that we have can win or lose a game too. So I just really hope that Bronco Nation soaks up Jarrett or Boomer, whoever has the starting position, and continues to show him that love, because when Bronco Nation showed me and James all that love and all that hype and all that appreciation, that made us want to elevate our game to a whole nother level. You know what I mean? So I just really hope that, Bronco Nation continues to show that love to the specialist group, because we appreciate it a whole lot more than I think they can imagine.
Yeah, it's been awesome to see. I don't know if I've ever seen a fan base of any school give so much love to the special teams units, and it's easy when
Right.
you have two guys that have broken so many records. But a lot of excitement for the guys coming in, and I hope that culture that the fan base is now established of rooting and supporting our special teams guys
Right.
is gonna continue. I'm sure the Blue Collar Club will keep doing their stuff.
100%. But that's why I want to stress the importance, because obviously you don't want to be in a position where fans hate you, you know what I mean? Or don't believe in you just because if me and James are gone. I don't obviously want the fans to be like, okay, because they're gone, like there's no hope in that position anymore. There is hope. We have high caliber guys in that room that are going to be able to get the job done. And so I just hope and pray that they continue to show that love and that passion for that position.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for coming on and having this discussion with me. It's been great to be
Absolutely.
able to peek behind the curtain to your incredible career and to be able to share your insight on this special teams unit, which I think fans should be very excited for coming this 2025 season.
Absolutely.
Make sure if you didn't watch the defensive preview that I did with Alexander Tuber, make sure you go watch that. I'll put a link to it. It's pretty easily foundable on my channel, but I'll put a link to that in the description and the overall playlist for these videos. The offensive preview will be coming out soon. I'll be announcing my special guest for that very soon as well. But thanks so much again, Jonah, for coming on and having this discussion. It's been awesome having you.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, man. It was fun to be able to chat about it.
Well, thanks so much for coming on. Thanks everybody for watching all the way to the end. Again, leave those comments in the comment section below. Any thoughts you have on the Boise State special teams, what you're excited for, what you're concerned about, what you think needs to improve, any thoughts you have. I want you to put those in the comments below, and we have this discussion with each and every one of you. So thanks so much for watching all the way to the end. Thanks again, Jonah, so much for coming on. And as always, go Big Blue!